Hi, how you doing? Here's something no one talks about. Hardening off seedlings is significantly harder, slower, trickier, and more labor intensive in a cold climate. So if you feel like hanging out and talking about beating yet another cold climate garden challenge, stick around. My name is Sharon, and I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sask Garden. If you have plants or seedlings indoors that you plan to put outdoors, you hopefully know that you need to go through a process called hardening off before they can actually stay outdoors. And if you don't know about this process, this video will be especially enlightening for you. You know, it's really not too far in the distant future that we need to start this process so that all our cost and time and energy starting those seedlings doesn't all get destroyed in a matter of a few hours. It doesn't matter if these plants are flowers or vegetables, and it doesn't matter if they're cold season plants or not. If they are indoor grown, whether under lights or in a window, or really even in a greenhouse, they will need to be hardened off. And that process often is not easy in a challenging cold climate. So what makes it so much harder for us cold zoners? Well, first of all, the temperature swings are extreme and rapid. Cold zones are known for dramatic swings. A seedling might experience freezing or very near freezing temperatures at 8 in the morning, then warm temperatures with intense sun in the middle of the day, and then we're back to near freezing temperatures, sometimes by 8 p.m. That's a big temperature swing of probably 20 degrees C or 36 F in a 12-hour period. That difference is called a temperature differential, and that big swing is a high stress scenario for most plants. These temperature swings, these big ones, stress plants in ways that gradual temperature changes do not, because leaf tissue expands and contracts, cell membranes become leaky, and the plant just lands up burning energy, simply trying to maintain function or stay alive rather than building resilience, and it slows development. Warmer climates tend to have more stable day-to-night differentials and not such big swings. Our seedlings aren't just adjusting to the sun. They're sometimes adjusting to what feels like winter in the morning, and then summer in the afternoon, and then winter again at night. Another thing that makes it so tough for us is that the risk of frost persists throughout the hardening off period. We all know that our last frost date is a suggestion, it's not a guarantee. And so it's common to have frost after seedlings have been moved outside. A warmer climate gardener probably isn't thinking about having to cover their seedlings at the end of May. Another point is our wind is more severe and it's persistent. I've talked about it a lot. It's windy where I live. My typical day, the wind is calm for a little bit in the early morning, then it's windy all day, and then it starts to calm down again in the early evening. That's the norm. Especially in the last few years, a day without wind is a gift. And I've learned to harden off in wind, coping with the wind, because if I wait for stillness, I'd be waiting all spring. The wind is a big concern when hardening off because it physically damages the stems and leaves, and it dries out the soil in no time, especially in smaller cell packs that are filled with plant roots. And, we need more infrastructure. A mild climate gardener can harden off with probably a nice shaded spot and maybe a hose for watering. A cold climate gardener, on the other hand, needs multiple microclimates, cold frames, frost blankets or row cover, and a protected staging area like a garage or an enclosed porch. We need to put them somewhere when they're not outside getting toughened up. So, we're not just acclimating plants to sun and wind. We're managing temperature, frost, and wind simultaneously. And that often requires different setups for different days. Also, our consequences of failure are more severe. In a short growing season, losing a week or two to hardening off failure can mean no harvest from that crop or reduced yields from late planting. In my short growing season, if I lose a week or two to hardening off mistakes, that shortens my growing season even more. And maybe I don't get a harvest from those vegetables that need a longer season. The stakes are just higher. So saying all that, why bother hardening off? Why do we have to? So, when I read comments and questions about hardening off, it always seems that some are under the impression that hardening off is just about getting plants used to the cooler temperatures. But the full explanation is that seedlings and indoor grown plants need to get used to the wind and sunshine just as much, maybe even more. And that process needs to be gentle and gradual. Plants and seedlings that are not hardened off to some degree will shock badly. They'll shock they get sun shock where leaves turn white or they fry up in the sun. Wind shock where they flatten and break. Cold shock, the leaves can turn purple, and the long-term effect is stunted growth. And, at very worst, the plants just die from too much shock. What needs to be hardened off? Well, pretty much anything that's been growing in a pot in a protected environment. Certainly anything that has been growing in the house, whether under grow lights or on the windowsill. If you've been growing under full spectrum grow lights, that mimics sunshine, but it is in no way the same. And the sun that comes through windows is filtered, and it is way less intense than outdoor sunlight. First of all, the intensity. A clear window pane filters out 30 to 50% of available light. Double or triple pane windows, like we have in cold climates, up to 70% reduction. The outdoor sunlight today is easily 10 times more intense than the light that's coming in the window. Next is UV light. Glass blocks virtually all the UVB rays, the ones that cause sunburn. Indoors, seedlings grow thin-skinned leaves with no UV protection. Put them outside in direct sun and those leaves are going to get bleached and scorched within an hour. And also the heat plus the wind together. Indoors, the air is relatively still. Outdoors, the sun heats the leaf and the wind strips away the moisture, and that happens together at the same time. A seedling that was happy at 22C or 75F indoors, the leaf temperature can hit 35C or 95F. Outdoors, even if the air temperature outdoors is, 10C or 50 Fahrenheit. And at the same time, it's losing water faster than its tiny roots can replace it. Even if you have a fan set up to move the air on your seedlings, it's still not the same effect as the wind and sun combined. So here's what happens inside the plant when you skip hardening off. The leaves get sunscald, bleached white patches where chlorophyll literally burns up. That tissue's dead forever. The cuticle, so there's a waxy layer that seals in moisture on every leaf, that wasn't built for wind when you grow them indoors. So when you put them outdoors without hardening off, the leaves stay wilted for days. And if UV rays hit that little tiny growing tip, that tender little growing tip, that tip will die and your plant will have to start over from a side shoot. And in a short season, that can cost you weeks. Starting seedlings indoors under full spectrum grow lights, it's incredible for getting good strong seedlings and growing full-size plants. But they do not replicate the UV, wind, or the intensity of the outdoor sun. Say you have a seedling that looks absolutely perfect under your grow lights at noon, but if you put it outside in the sun and the wind, it will be absolutely destroyed by 3 p.m. if you skip hardening off. This isn't a risk, it's a guarantee. So your indoor plants, it doesn't matter if you started them in a south window or under $1,000 grow light. The transition from indoors to outdoors is the most dangerous moment in a seedling's life. So is hardening off optional? Not a chance. If you've been watching my channel, you know that I overwinter a lot of geraniums and a few other plants under grow lights. They're potted plants. They're not seedlings, or there's some cuttings, but I do have big plants. And, I'm still very cautious about hardening them off before they go back outside into the full sun, because I don't want all that tender indoor growth to fry in the outdoor sun. They haven't toughened up or hardened off, even though they are full-size plants. I have a small greenhouse, and so my process is a little different because most plants transition from the grow lights to the greenhouse for a few weeks and then outside. But even plants from my greenhouse need hardening off because the polycarbonate also diffuses UV and blocks the wind. So I like to start hardening off about a week or so before I plan to plant that plant in their outdoor pots or in the garden. And this isn't necessarily a week to 10 days before last frost. My last frost is generally mid to late May, and I always estimate about a week after May long weekend. And so I wouldn't plant out warm season transplants like peppers or melons or squash until sometimes in early June. And cold tolerant plants like leafy greens or cabbage plants are most often planted sometime in the first 2 weeks of May. They can take colder temperatures, and they can take colder temperatures while they're hardening off. The onions, the lettuces, all the cabbage family, they can all tolerate temps just a few degrees above freezing. So I'm not hardening off everything all at once, all at the same time. I start hardening off those early plantings much earlier, and the late plantings much later. And that means I'm probably going to start hardening off cabbage and lettuce transplants just within the next 2 to 3 weeks. You know, depending on the weather, and of course all that snow out there still has to melt. So really, I'm potentially going to be hardening those off about a month before my last frost. And peppers, tomatoes, and melons, I don't even begin to start hardening them off until the last week of May. It's important to know your plants and to know what kind of temperatures they can take. As for how to harden off, just think gradual, and you want shade first, sun second, and wind last. Ideally, we get to harden off our plants starting with a string of cloudy days. Cloudy, not a lot of wind, and temperatures above 10 degrees C. That's ideal. And if you get that, the whole process turns out to be a lot easier. But chances are, like they are for me, I am most often dealing with the brightest sunshine, not a cloud in the sky, strong wind, and some mornings it's just too darn cold outside for early morning sun. But here's a schedule that generally works. On the first and second day, day 1 and 2, maximum 2 or 3 hours in the shade, or at best minimal dappled light. With no wind or very little wind. Set a timer on your watch or on your phone. Don't forget them on those days. Then on days 3 to 4, increase that to 4 to 5 hours of total outdoor time with a bit of morning sun, or it can be evening sun too. Evenings often have the benefit of being warmer than early mornings. Still provide shelter from the wind, and set your timer, don't forget them. On days 5 to 6, you can increase that to, say, 6 to 8 hours total outside time, mostly morning or evening sun, but put them back into dappled shade or shade for the afternoon, that midday harsh sun. A light breeze should be okay on these days. And then on days 7 to 8, you know, you're almost there. They should be able to spend the full day outside. Light but steady breeze shouldn't be too much of a problem at this point. Still bring them in at night or leave them in the garage or somewhere like that. But if the nighttime temperatures are warm enough, I will either leave them in the garage for a couple nights, or I put them under row cover in a raised bed. And then after this, if the nights are warm enough, then the plants can spend the nights outside. Full days in the sun, they should be ready for planting out. But a note about full days outside while they're still in pots is you have to check the moisture levels, because they're going to dry out really quickly in the sun and the wind. In particular, if they're in smaller pots and those pots are filled with roots, they will dry out pretty fast. As for where to harden off, this is going to depend on your yard or the area you have available. I like to use an area in my yard in the dappled shade of a maple tree. I have an evergreen to the west of the area, so that provides protection from that almost constant west or northwest wind, and it also gives good shade from the late afternoon sun. The area gets nice early morning sunlight, so it warms the area earlier, and I can gradually move the hardening off area a little further out from that dappled light into more full sun. And this area works okay, but if there's a strong wind from any other direction, then I have to move the plants. Sometimes it's only a few feet, and that makes a difference. Of course, everyone's yard is different, so that's where you need to find or create your own area in some manner. You know, I'm lucky that I'm able to babysit my plants all day, every day, most days, but maybe you aren't able to and you need a better option. And so there are ways for that. As I said, evening sun is okay too when you're starting your hardening off process. Evenings often have the benefit of being warmer than early mornings, and as I said, for me, the wind often calms down. So say you left for work and it was still below freezing, but you get home and it's a beautiful evening. Evening sun, probably anything after 5 o'clock, works just fine, and it's a good time to start that early hardening off period. Another option is clear plastic totes with lids. They make pretty good little temporary greenhouses. They're actually really useful, but a couple of things to watch out for is a plastic tote with the lid on will heat up and can become an oven when that sun hits it if there's no ventilation. So you can take the top off and just put it on a skew that leaves some space for ventilation to let the hot air out. And the other thing to be aware of is the wind, of course, so that the wind doesn't catch it, either blowing the top off or sending the entire tote tumbling. I've used a landscape brick to either hold the top down or right inside the tote to just give it some weight. And now I'm going to talk about row cover. You know, I am a big fan of row cover. It is incredibly useful throughout the season. I'm going to start using it outside as soon as the snow melts enough that I can get out to the garden. And I'm going to use it right up until everything is harvested from the garden. Row cover is a cold climate gardener's best friend. It's easily available, relatively cheap, and will last for years if you anchor it properly. With some hoops and that row cover, you can easily make a makeshift tunnel to protect your transplants. Early in the hardening off process, a double layer of that row cover can be used to provide a little more diffuse light. Row cover lets air through, so it never gets hot inside like plastic can. I use hoops and row cover on a raised bed, and it makes an excellent hardening off area. Plus, at the same time, it protects from insects like the early season flea beetles, or from birds that want to snack on the seedlings, or from stray cats that want to dig them up, or other animals that may be wandering around the yard. I routinely also use a shade cloth on top of the row cover, and this is really helpful when we get those really weird, crazy hot days in May when the little plants just can't yet take that kind of heat. Row cover also has a few degrees of frost protection, so it actually helps in the hardening off process for those first few nights that you let the plants stay out all night. It helps to keep the soil just a little warmer, and of course it'll keep frost off. You can throw a blanket over it for the night to help just a little bit more if need be. And so if I have plants under row cover, when I want to increase the amount of wind that the plants get, I just lift up and clip up the sides of the row cover a bit to allow a bit more breeze through. And that just slowly and gradually gets those plants used to more wind. So row cover helps to diffuse the light, it provides that light frost protection, and it's a wind barrier. All that needs to be done is to have some method of keeping it over the plants and pulled taut and secured to keep it from blowing away or flapping too much, which can also damage the plants. I use landscape bricks for that, and I use PEX plumbing pipe over rebar stakes for the hoops. A heavy gauge wire, something like a wire clothesline kind of wire, that also makes great hoops. And you can install hoops and row cover pretty much anywhere temporarily, especially the wire hoops. They would poke into the lawn easily, assuming your soil isn't frozen solid. And you could use a pallet or some planks of wood just to get your plants up off the cold soil and put those hoops and row cover over that. The reason I prefer row cover over plastic sheeting over the hoops is because plastic heats up fast. offers no air movement or ventilation, offers no filtering of the sun like row cover does. It also offers no frost protection. And it can also hold way too much humidity that can lead to fungal issues. I highly recommend using row cover, not only in the hardening off process, but as I said, several times throughout the growing season. Hey, thanks very much for hanging out with me today and talking some cold zone gardening challenges. As always, if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up, tell your friends, and hit that subscribe button. I do appreciate you taking the time to watch this video today, and I hope you're doing well. See you soon.